battle over language returns.
ஒரே மொழி பேசுகிறோம், ஒரே எதிர்காலத்தை நோக்கி நடக்கிறோம்.
Election about identity, loyalty.
Bye bye Stalin.
Dravida model versus double engine की सरकार.
बीजेपी एनडीए की डबल इंजन सरकार बनना तय है.
The stakes are high.
From the ground, the questions that matter, the voices that shape the vote. India votes only on News 9. This is India's #1 news network, and you're watching News 9. English news as it should be.
A very good morning. Thank you so much for tuning in this Friday morning to News 9. You are watching Morning Brief at 9. I'm Karthik Malhotra. The big story that we continue to track right here on News 9 all day long comes to be from the fragile ceasefire in West Asia. As US pushes for free passage via the Strait of Hormuz, Iran meanwhile demands an end to Israeli strikes on Hezbollah and Lebanon. With Islamabad talks around the corner, will Iran engage with J.D. Vance-led US delegation? That's the big question we ask on the show this morning. Also on the show, stock markets remain choppy with profit booking a day after ceasefire announcement. Should you buy the dip? We discuss with Amit Kumar Gupta, who joins us on the show later. And TCS Q4 results have dismissed AI worries. Growth seen across revenue, profits, as well as headcount. All this and more on this edition of Morning Brief at 9. You're watching Morning Brief at 9. First up, a quick look at all the headlines we are tracking for you this Friday morning. U.S. President Donald Trump warns Iran to halt reported tanker toll plans in Strait of Hormuz as blockade disrupts global oil supplies. Islamabad tightens security, shuts schools and shops, declares holiday ahead of high-stakes U.S. Iran peace talks. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu orders direct peace talks with Lebanon, says potential deal including Hezbollah disarmament could be historic. EU Mediterranean ministers call for immediate Lebanon ceasefire as Israel signals direct talks and violence tightens fragile Iran-U.S. truce. UK Prime Minister Kier Starmer pushes coordinated global plan with Trump to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and restore shipping after fragile Iran-U.S. ceasefire. U.S. First Lady Melania Trump says she had no knowledge or connection to late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, rejecting claims and calling out speculation in a rare public statement. Venezuela moves to open its vast mineral reserves to private players, deepening economic reforms after easing state control over oil under U.S. pressure. Russian President Vladimir Putin declares a temporary ceasefire over Orthodox Easter following a similar pause proposal from Ukraine. And China's top diplomat Wang Yi signals deeper cooperation with North Korea during a rare visit to Pyongyang amid regional disruption in West Asia. U.S. President Donald Trump has warned Iran against charging fees on oil tankers passing through the strategic Strait of Hormuz, calling such a move unacceptable amid a deepening global energy crisis. Now, posting on Truth Social, Donald Trump said reports of Iran imposing transit charges better not be true and urged Tehran to stop immediately if they are. Remember, the strait, already blockaded since the start of the conflict, has triggered one of the worst disruptions to global energy supplies in history. Reports suggest that Iran is considering tolls for ships, which is strongly opposed by Western leaders. According to a report, Tehran may even demand payments in cryptocurrency during a proposed 2-week ceasefire, citing control over the key oil route. Meanwhile, Trump signaled confidence that oil flows would resume regardless of Iran's cooperation, stating, and I quote him, "You'll see oil start flowing with or without the help of Iran," unquote. And ahead of the high-stakes talks in Islamabad, the U.S. and Iran are preparing for a fresh diplomatic push, with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance leading the U.S. delegation that also includes Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, while reports suggest Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Bakir Kalibaf leading the Iran side, even as Iran's official confirmation on attending the talks is still awaited. Mediated by Pakistan, the negotiations aim to stabilize a fragile ceasefire following weeks of intense conflict. But is there actually a ceasefire? While both sides have indicated a temporary halt in hostilities, the truce remains uncertain and loosely defined. Here's all we need to know and what we know, in fact, so far about the ongoing ceasefire.
Ahead of high-stakes peace talks in Islamabad between delegations led by U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and Iran's Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Kalibaf, a fragile ceasefire hangs in the balance. Here's what we know about the truce. Iran and the United States agreed on Tuesday to a 2-week ceasefire, but fighting has continued across the Middle East, with heavy airstrikes pounding Lebanon. Dr. Borju Özçelik is a senior research fellow on Middle East security at Royal United Services Institute.
2 weeks is a very short window, and it will likely fly by. Of course, the 2 weeks is also not guaranteed to be uninterrupted by acts of violence or breaches of the ceasefire. Will be a very fragile window of opportunity to negotiate some of these key sticking points.
Meanwhile, there was no sign Iran was completely lifting its near-total blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, after U.S. President Donald Trump threatened to devastate Iran if it didn't reopen the waterway.
Trump seems to expect an immediate clear passage, and Iran seems to be setting certain conditions, or at least wants to work within certain parameters. What I think one of the strategic or narrative victories that Iran was able to win as well was that it shifted the focus of the war away from the nuclear issue to reopening the Strait of Hormuz.
Iranian state television said a first vessel transited the Strait of Hormuz with Tehran's permission after the ceasefire, but shipping sources reported the Iranian Navy was threatening vessels attempting to pass. Iran said it could lift its blockade ahead of peace talks, though ships would still need Iranian approval. The two sides enter peace talks with sharply different agendas, with the U.S. pressing Iran to halt uranium enrichment, give up its missiles, and stop backing regional allies. All demands it had already made in talks it abandoned 2 days before the war started.
The Iranian proposal suggests that all sanctions, primary and secondary, will be lifted, that Iran will be paid compensation for war damages, and that the U.S. has effectively agreed to allow Iran to enrich uranium, and that it will continue to retain sovereign control over the Strait of Hormuz. It's very difficult at this very early stage to be able to discern decisively what is true and what is not. This is a framework of principles, but I think really what both sides have agreed to is simply to come together in Pakistan to talk about their differences and try to find a way forward over the next 2 weeks.
And on to Pakistan now. Islamabad has ramped up security ahead of expected U.S.-Iran talks, with authorities enforcing strict measures across the city. A 2-day public holiday has been declared to reduce movement, while police have set up checkpoints, especially around the high-security red zone, conducting vehicle checks. Schools and shops remain largely shut, with only limited activity visible in some areas. Many residents have welcomed the precautions, citing safety concerns. The heightened security comes as Pakistan prepares to host crucial talks between the United States and Iran, aiming to ease tensions and stabilizing the West Asian region. And even as Iran demands end of hostilities towards Lebanon and Hezbollah, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that Israel is set to begin direct peace talks with Lebanon with a key focus on the disarming of Hezbollah. Netanyahu said the move follows repeated appeals from the Lebanese government to initiate negotiations, adding that he has instructed his cabinet to formally open dialogue. Listen in.
אני מבקש לומר לכם, אין הפסקת אש בלבנון. אנחנו ממשיכים להכות בעוצמה את חיזבאללה, ואנחנו לא נעצור עד שנחזיר לכם את הביטחון. לאחר פניות חוזרות ונשנות של ממשלת לבנון לפתוח איתנו במשא ומתן לשלום, אני הנחיתי אמש בקבינט לפתוח במשא ומתן ישיר עם לבנון כדי להשיג שני יעדים. אחד, פירוק חיזבאללה מנשקו, והשני, הסכם שלום היסטורי, בר קיימא, בין ישראל ללבנון.
Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Kier Starmer arrived in Doha as the fallout from the Iran-U.S. conflict continues to disrupt global shipping, with a key focus now on the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. In a call with Donald Trump, Starmer stressed the need for a coordinated international plan to restore safe passage through the crucial oil route following a fragile ceasefire with Iran. Now, both leaders agreed that while a ceasefire is now in place, the immediate priority is ensuring freedom of navigation and resuming shipping operations as global markets remain on edge. Listening to the UK Prime Minister.
I think the mood is very much one of shock that they were attacked in the first place, because of course they weren't attacking Iran, and the intensity of some of the attacks. Relief that there's now a ceasefire. I think a general sense that it's fragile, that there's work to do in relation to it. And then a lot of reflection and discussion, me with them, about the work we did over the last 6 to 7 weeks together in collective self-defence, the capabilities, and an opportunity, frankly, for me to say thank you to our personnel who are out here, who've been many of the pilots been working from about 2 hours after the conflict started.
Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has urged European governments to act quickly, saying Donald Trump wants concrete commitments within days, in fact, to help secure the Strait of Hormuz. Now, speaking amid concerns over U.S. threats to step back from NATO, Rutte acknowledged some allies were initially a bit slow and caught off guard. However, he said support has now ramped up, with a massive amount of assistance being mobilized, including basing and logistics.
If NATO can help, obviously NATO is there.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte on Thursday said that some alliance members were initially a bit slow to provide assistance to the U.S. and Iran.
In fairness, they were also a bit surprised.
But he added there is now a, quote, massive amount of support, including basing and logistics. The comments come a day after his White House meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump, who has criticized European allies in recent weeks for what he said was inadequate support. Diplomats who spoke to Reuters said Rutte told European governments that Trump wants concrete commitments within days to help secure the Strait of Hormuz. Rutte is also working to defuse a crisis after Trump said he was considering withdrawing from the 32-member transatlantic alliance. On Thursday, a senior White House official told Reuters that Trump has discussed with advisors the option of removing some U.S. troops from Europe. The official, who requested anonymity to discuss internal deliberations, said no decision has been made, and the White House has not directed the Pentagon to draw up concrete plans for a troop reduction on the continent. European leaders are now under pressure to show they are quickly making tangible plans to help secure the Strait of Hormuz.
This alliance is not whistling past the graveyard, as you would say in the United States. Allies recognize, and I recognize, we are in a period of profound change in the transatlantic alliance. Europe is assuming a greater and fairer share of the task of providing for its conventional defense.
Multiple European allies have said they're willing to help in the Strait of Hormuz, but only once the situation is less hostile and an agreement with Iran is made that their ships will not be attacked.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has warned against the U.S.-Iran war, straining ties between Washington and its European allies, stressing the importance of unity within NATO. Now, speaking to reporters, Merz said he does not want the alliance to split, calling NATO a key guarantor of Europe's security. He added that he urged Donald Trump to pursue urgent negotiations with Iran, emphasizing Germany's strong interest in a diplomatic resolution to the escalating crisis.
Ich will keine Spaltung der NATO. Die NATO ist ein Garant unserer Sicherheit, auch und vor allem in Europa. Wir müssen hier weiter kühlen Kopf bewahren. Kommen kann, die Lage dort erfordert auch Antworten. Und es ist meine feste Absicht, alles zu tun, um auch den Schutz der NATO unter Einschluss der Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika für Europa zu erhalten. Dieses Bündnis ist jedenfalls gegenwärtig durch nichts zu ersetzen. Und deswegen habe ich ein hohes Interesse daran, es zu erhalten und es mit dem amerikanischen Präsidenten.
Meanwhile, European Union finance ministers from Mediterranean nations have called for an immediate ceasefire in Lebanon as violence escalates alongside the broader Iran-U.S. conflict. Now, meeting in Split in Croatia, the MED9 group condemned ongoing Israeli strikes and pushed for urgent de-escalation. The European Commissioner said Lebanon was not included in the recent ceasefire between Iran and the U.S., urging a separate truce between Israel and Lebanon.
So just at the beginning, I want really to condemn what's going on in Lebanon and looking forward to ceasefire also there. Although now we heard that a ceasefire in Lebanon was not part of this agreement between Iran and the U.S. So what we are advocating for is a separate agreement between Lebanon and Israel.
We are against the Israel attacks against Lebanon, but there are good news now during the meeting. The Minister for Foreign Affairs of Israel called me for informing me on the decision for new negotiations between Israel, direct negotiations between Israel and Lebanon, probably in the United States of America in the next days. This is an important step. The direct dialogue between these two countries is important for achieving good results. I hope for achieving a ceasefire also in Lebanon.
International Monetary Fund Chief Kristalina Georgieva has warned that the fallout from the West Asia conflict could sharply increase global demand for financial assistance, with the IMF expecting requests between $20 to $50 billion. The IMF has in fact downgraded global forecast, warning the crisis is testing the world economy, even as a temporary ceasefire holds and ongoing strikes in Lebanon risk undermining long-term peace efforts.
Given the spillovers from the war, we expect near-term demand for IMF balance of payment support to rise by somewhere between $20 and $50 billion, with the lower bound prevailing if ceasefire holds on economies and on people. So, what hit us? A supply shock that is large, with the world's daily oil flow cut by some 13% and its LNG flow by some 20%. It is global, with all of us now paying more for energy and with supply chains disrupted around the world.
Going on now, Gulf states including Saudi Arabia and the UAE are exploring a new low-cost $2,500 interceptor drone to counter waves of Iranian Shahed attacks amid the ongoing U.S.-Iran conflict. Now, with Iran deploying large numbers of the cheap Shahed drones, U.S. and allied forces have been relying on costly air defense missiles, quickly depleting stockpiles. Now, a more affordable interceptor being developed by Terra Drone and Ukrainian partners is being seen as a potential game changer to counter the growing drone threat.
Gulf states hope a cheap interceptor developed by Japanese firm Terra Drone and Ukrainian partners could be the answer to waves of Iranian attacks. Since the start of the U.S.-Israeli war with Iran, Tehran has launched large numbers of low-cost Shahed drones. U.S. forces and regional allies have largely relied on expensive missiles to stop them, rapidly depleting their air defense stockpiles. Terra Drone Chief Executive Toru Tokushige says the conflict has highlighted the limits of missile-based air defense.
So for this current war in the Middle East, Shahed drones are flying one after another from Iran toward Israel. From Tel Aviv to Tehran is about 994 miles, right? So those Shaheds are flying around 1,200 miles. And finally, people in Japan and overseas as well have come to understand just how extremely important these interceptor drones are, especially since missiles are running out in the Middle East.
Terra Drone says its A1 drones cost about $2,500 each. By contrast, each Patriot interceptor missile costs around $4 million, making them an expensive way to shoot down Shaheds, priced in the low tens of thousands.
Shooting missiles down with missiles might just be fine, but shooting a Shahed that costs around $31,000 with a missile that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, that kind of economic irrationality just isn't feasible anymore. And people are starting to realize that. So demand is extremely high. But among that, with the conflict in the Middle East happening now, and then in areas near Russia, like Poland and Europe, those areas are seeing particularly strong attention, or rather, strong interest in this technology.
Terra Drone began offering military sales last month through a partnership with Ukrainian startup Amazing Drones. The Terra A1 has not yet been battle-tested and is expected to be delivered to Ukraine's military for trials. Russia's foreign ministry said Wednesday that it had summoned Japan's ambassador in protest over Terra Drone's investment in Ukrainian interceptor drone technology. Moscow said relations with Tokyo have been reduced to zero over what it calls Japan's unfriendly stance.
All right, let's move on now to how the stock markets across the world are reacting to this temporary truce between Iran and the U.S. Well, U.S. stock markets moved higher on Thursday as investors drew comfort from the ongoing negotiations aimed at resolving the West Asia conflict. Now, all three major U.S. indices closed in the positive territory as hopes of de-escalation helped offset lingering geopolitical risks. Take a look.
U.S. stocks closed higher on Thursday, with the Dow and S&P 500 each adding roughly 0.6%, and the Nasdaq climbing more than 0.8%. All three stock indexes rebounded from an earlier dip as Israel sought talks with Lebanon, explains Eric Ditton, president and managing director of the Wealth Alliance.
So the markets initially were down in the morning. Concerns about the Strait of Hormuz being closed, concerns about Israel and Hezbollah and continuing battles over there. But I think we got some positive news in that Israel announced that it wants to have immediate talks with Lebanon. I don't know how those will end up going, but that was positive. And there was just a lot of talk amongst UAE, the U.S., other allies that, hey, we've got to get the Strait of Hormuz open. Let's be clear, it's not open right now. Despite the ceasefire, there's virtually no flow of oil going through the strait. That's going to have to change. Wall Street is betting that it will. I make that same bet.
Oil prices rose but stayed below $100 a barrel. Stocks on the move Thursday included Amazon, which rose 5.5% after CEO Andy Jassy said AI services at its cloud computing unit are generating annualized revenue of more than $15 billion. Shares of Constellation Brands jumped 8.5% after the company posted a smaller than expected drop in fourth quarter sales. On the downside, shares of Applied Digital dropped 8% after the data center operator's third quarter net loss widened from a year earlier. Meanwhile, data from the Commerce Department showed the economy grew at a slower than expected pace in the fourth quarter, while the Personal Expenditures Price Index showed inflation remains elevated. A separate inflation reading from the Bureau of Labor Statistics is due on Friday.
All right, and we will get into that inflation story hitting the U.S. later on the show. But meanwhile, let's stick with the theme of stock markets, and Asia seems to be trading in healthy shades of green again this morning. Remember, yesterday we saw a little bit of correction, but this morning again with talks of the ceasefire, fragile as it may be, holding Asian markets are on a high, with Kospi, the South Korean benchmark index, up more than 2% in trade again. Meanwhile, Japan's Nikkei 225 also up more than or almost about 1.5 percentage points. Taiwan's TAIEX up 1.25. Meanwhile, Hong Kong's Hang Seng as well as Shanghai Composite Index both in the green this morning. Similar sentiment seen even on the Indian stock markets, with the Sensex and Nifty both trading in the green zone. In fact, Sensex is up about 500 odd points from yesterday's close, about 580 odd points from yesterday's close. Now up about 3/4 of a percentage point, comfortably above the 77,000 levels, trading at about 77,200 odd points. Nifty 50 meanwhile also up about 0.8% or almost 200 points, trading close to the levels of 24,000. Better momentum seen in the mid-cap and the small-cap space. Meanwhile, the volatility index, India VIX, has finally fallen below the levels of 20, indicating lower volatility but still fairly high. Meanwhile, let's look at the Nifty 50 heat map, and had it not been for the red shades in the IT sector, it would have been a definitive shade of green across the Nifty 50 heat map. IT sector, despite fairly strong earnings, one would argue, on TCS, not really lifting the sentiment on IT stocks. In fact, TCS is down more than 1.5% or so in trade. Infosys down more than 2%. HCL Tech as well as Tech Mahindra both down more than 1%. Green shoots seen, however, on Wipro, which is up about 1.5%. The banking stocks are looking healthy this morning, and even oil major Reliance Industries is up pretty much in exact the same percentage lines with the Sensex and the Nifty. Consumer durables, including the auto pack, looking healthy. Maruti Suzuki and M&M both up more than 1%. Two-wheeler maker Bajaj Auto also up about 1.3% or so. Let's put all this into perspective with Amit Kumar Gupta, founder of FinTrek Capital, who joins us on the show. Good morning, Amit. Pleasure having you back here with us on News 9. We will come to the TCS results and potentially what could be adding to pessimism in IT stocks in just a bit. But overall, markets in a better mood today than what we saw yesterday. Was yesterday a case of immediate profit booking after the announcement of ceasefire? And are we seeing a little bit of buying on dips happening this morning?
Yeah, hi, good morning, Kartik. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I think the market is trying to price in how quickly we can see the traffic on the Strait of Hormuz coming along. Currently, there is no traffic. I think less than 5 are happening. And Iran is saying around 10 to 15 vehicles on a per day basis. I think market is hoping that, there can be a higher number to that. And we have to see, after this 2 week of negotiations, what number we finally gets into it. But just going by seeing the movement, etc., if crude comes under control and we see higher traffic on the SOH, then I think this buy on dips will get further momentum.
Let's stick to those oil prices and, of course, the entire flow of energy. And that is something which definitely impacts all energy producers, refiners, as well as distributors. And I'm looking at the charts right now. BPCL and IOC both up about 0.85% or so in trade this morning. Hindustan Petroleum up about 1.3%. This despite the fact that oil prices continue to remain elevated. And like you mentioned, hardly any passage through the Strait of Hormuz. So why are we seeing some buying activity? Is it only sentimental sort of momentum that we are seeing on oil marketing companies this morning?
Yeah, I think it's more of a sentimental or a relief kind of a rally. OMCs can have tough quarter given the how the oil prices would move on the global markets. Plus, I think if government thinks that the fiscal risk will get impacted, they might pass on the higher crude prices to the consumers after the elections is over. So we can see a little bit dent on the consumption also happening. So yeah, it's more like speculative buying at this point of time.
Right, speculative buying there. Meanwhile, I'm also looking at stocks of logistics, transportation companies as well as ports. And Indigo continues to remain up. In fact, Indigo was one of the major gainers after that ceasefire was announced. That stock was up almost 9% or so, if I remember correctly, 2 days back. This morning also, Indigo continues to trade in the green. Meanwhile, positive momentum, not as much buoyancy seen across the logistics and transportation stocks. Your view on this larger sector of mobility?
Yeah, see, logistics is quite impacted because of the higher crude prices. Not just March, but April is also impacted. And I think next 2 months will also be impacted as far as the crude prices are concerned. This ebb and flow during the ceasefire and volatile crude prices, that's going to challenge the investors to stay invested in logistic companies. Because in the short term, the impact especially in the Q1 earnings will be quite high. Given that there are constraints in energy availability, there is a disruption in supply chains. And I think even in the coming quarter earnings season, there will be a negative commentary on the demand challenges, on the input cost pressures, and the closures due to raw material, energy shortage. They are in sort of a bother space for at least 1 or 2 quarters.
Okay, so 1 or 2 quarters are likely to be challenging for the transportation logistics companies, which are directly dependent on oil prices. Meanwhile, let's now shift focus to IT stocks and begin with TCS, which is, of course, one of the first to announce their quarterly earnings. And the Q4 results have shown substantial growth, one would argue. Revenue on a year-to-year basis is up almost 10%, 9.6% at over 70,000 crore rupees. Net profit also up in double digits on a year-on-year basis to about 13,700 crore rupees. That's up 12%, and the company has announced a dividend of about 31 rupees per share. But this morning, stocks not reacting too positively to news coming in from TCS earnings, and in fact the entire IT sector seems to be down, despite the knock-on effect from U.S. would have suggested that IT stocks should trade in the positive territory. Any fears that investors are seeing around TCS, Amit, despite the fact that there is a 31 rupee per share dividend announced on the basis of a 12% year-on-year growth seen in profits?
No, I think on a standalone basis, TCS results was as per the expectations. The Q4 revenue grew around 1.25% quarter on quarter. The international business was again 1.5% up. EBITDA margins expanded. There was, they have reinvested some of the tailwinds back into increasing capabilities and growth engines in the AI. The deal wins were strong. In fact, there were 3 mega deals in the last quarter, which takes the total deal amount to about 40 billion in FY26 total. So I don't think the result was that an issue, but what we are seeing the commentary coming from the U.S. outside, outside this market is that there are furthermore newer versions of Anthropic coming along, and this time it's going to hit a lot of accountants and tax entries which are happening.
Right.
There is a company called Intuit in the U.S. Which was down about 10% yesterday because it's tax filing season in the U.S. and a lot of people are using AI now to file taxes. So I think it's a sort of a cycle where every uptake or every version which comes in Anthropic, Cloud A, etc., that's going to impact negatively, and it will take 2-3 quarters to sort of assimilate how IT companies like TCS are actually benefiting from this Gen AI cycle.
Benefiting, or some would argue losing, but of course sticking to the theme of AI, I think all those fears around job losses, and remember TCS was among the biggest players when it came to axing employment roles across the company last year. We've seen Q4 add numbers to headcount. In fact, we've seen as much as almost 2,400 odd headcount additions to TCS in Q4 as compared to Q3. And the total headcount now stands at about 584,500 odd people. But the attrition rate, especially in top management, seems to be higher in Q4 than what we saw in Q3. So overall, this entire AI disruption story when it comes to job roles, we haven't really seen that after last year impact the IT sector as much, at least in the first 3 months of this year, Amit.
No, actually, the headcount for TCS actually rose by around 2,300 in Q4,
Exactly.
including some 750 plus with the deep advisory and consulting expertise. So I think it's just a role redefinition, I would say. In certain cases where the employees have been able to adapt to AI faster, they have been reassigned into different projects, or they are sort of elevated from their current roles. And what we are seeing is that, there is a growth recovery expected in FY27 with these strong deal wins. So I don't think, we should really look at the overall attrition number. That number may have come down in the last 1 year, but it's sort of adjustment. If the Gen AI cycle picks up, they do more deals, the vertical sees more growth revival, then the number of hiring will also go up.
All right, Amit. And what is your overall view? I understand that you're saying the next 3 quarters or so are going to be critical to understand where the IT sector is headed with all the disruptions that we are seeing with AI and beyond. But overall, how do you see a day like today when there is a massive correction in these quality stocks names, one would argue, HCL, Tech, Infosys and TCS? A good day for investors to cherry pick some of these names?
I think anyone who is getting into IT should at least look at 3 years perspective. I don't think anything major is expected in the next 1 or 2 quarters. The valuations have corrected definitely, so they are quite attractive from a 2-3 year perspective. But at that point of time, there is a threat of Gen AI, and we really don't know how the terminals values of these companies would end up, going forward. So if anybody wants to, invest, have at least a 3-year perspective, because they are still, good companies to own, good dividend yield. You might get open market buyback if the SEBI consultation paper goes through. So there could be some upside, but keep the expectations low and have a time horizon of at least 3 years.
Right, so a time horizon of 3 years, because nothing really is going to move the needle in the next 1 quarter or so. With that, let's leave it at that for now. Thank you so much, Amit Kumar Gupta. It's always a pleasure having you here with us on News9. While markets continue to be trading in the green this morning. Moving on now, oil prices moved higher on Thursday as doubts over the fragile 2-week U.S. Iran ceasefire weighed on market sentiment. Investors remain concerned that energy flows through the crucial Strait of Hormuz could continue to face disruptions despite the truce. Now, the uncertainty has kept supply fears alive, pushing crude prices upward even as diplomatic efforts continue.
Oil prices rose on Thursday. Markets were concerned about whether a 2-week Middle East ceasefire will hold up and were unsure about energy flows through the Strait of Hormuz. Brent crude futures were up around 3% at roughly $98 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude also rose by a similar amount to just under $98 a barrel. Both benchmarks fell below $100 per barrel in the previous trading session. That was on optimism the U.S.-Iranian ceasefire would result in the strait's reopening. But analysts still saw geopolitical risk, and there was no clarity on what U.S.-Iran talks would mean for oil flows. The Strait of Hormuz connects supply from Gulf producers to global markets, and it usually carries about a fifth of global oil and gas supply. Shippers on Wednesday said they needed clarity on terms of the ceasefire before they continued transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian media reported the country has issued maps to guide ships around mines and show safe paths for passage. Regional oil facilities also stayed under threat. An oil industry source said Iran struck sites in nearby countries after the ceasefire. It included a pipeline in Saudi Arabia, which has been used to bypass the Strait of Hormuz.
And rising oil-linked costs triggered by tensions in West Asia are now rippling through China's manufacturing sector, pushing plastic prices sharply higher. The impact is being felt most acutely in the country's largest plastics trading hub, where businesses are grappling with rising input cost and supply disruptions. Take a look.
This is Zhangmutou, also known as China's Plastic City. Located east of Guangzhou, China's largest plastic trading hub has been feeling the sting of rising oil-linked costs driven by the Iran war. Plastic prices have risen sharply, squeezing margins, disrupting logistics and fueling panic buying across the supply chain. Peng Xin, the general manager of a firm that manufactures plastic pellets, says costs have surged by about 60% since March. He also says his factory's safety stocks have been depleted with new raw materials being bought at elevated market prices, costs that he says would soon trickle down to customers. Zheng Bin, marketing manager at an online trading and pricing platform for plastic raw materials, said firms have been stocking up in preparation for a longer-lasting Iran war.
With the Middle East situation unlikely to ease in the next 1 or 2 months, panic has driven people to actively stock up. Upstream petrochemical plants without crude oil and feedstock to produce with have also been forced to raise their prices.
The rush to secure supplies has also clogged warehouses and roads. Warehouse owner Han Bing says this year is the busiest year he's ever seen, with daily turnover doubling to about 1,000 tons from around 500 tons previously.
At the peak, after March 5, Zhangmato was gridlocked for nearly a week. Traffic jams stretched about 6 to 9 miles. Every warehouse was packed to capacity, and both inbound and outbound cargo were heavily affected.
China is the world's largest plastic producer, consumer and exporter of final plastic products, according to a 2025 report by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development.
And Donald Trump's 2-week ceasefire with Iran is unlikely to bring immediate relief to the aviation sector despite a surge in airline stocks on optimism. The conflict, centered around disruptions to the Strait of Hormuz, has driven up jet fuel costs and forced airlines to reroute flights, cut capacity and raise fares. But can a temporary truce really fix the crisis this deep? This report tells you more.
U.S. President Donald Trump's 2-week ceasefire with Iran is unlikely to bring quick relief to the aviation industry, according to industry executives on Wednesday. That's even as airline shares surged on hopes the deal could ease the worst crisis carriers have faced in years. Industry officials warned that jet fuel supplies will remain tight and costly for months after damage to refining capacity across the Middle East. Delta Airlines on Wednesday forecast lower than expected profit for the second quarter and said it would cut capacity to try to offset about $2 billion in extra fuel costs it expects to book. Fuel, typically airlines' second largest cost after labour, accounts for about 27% of operating expenses. Jet fuel prices have more than doubled since the conflict erupted. It far outpaced a roughly 50% rise in crude prices before the ceasefire. Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz choked global fuel supplies, forcing airlines to hike fares, cut flights, add refuelling stops and carry extra fuel. Safety concerns have seen carriers cancel services to and from the Gulf. Oil fell below $100 per barrel after Trump said he had agreed to a 2-week ceasefire with Iran, subject to the strait's immediate and safe reopening. Despite the turmoil, airline and travel stocks rallied on expectations the ceasefire could mark a turning point. Tourism, however, also faces a long recovery. TUI said 2 of its cruise ships stranded in Abu Dhabi and Doha since the conflict began would take at least 4 weeks to return to service once conditions allow.
And time for a short break, but when we come back, a lot more awaiting you. Keep watching News 9.
Others see a teenage tantrum. I see you standing your ground. The world sees stubbornness. I see a soft, soft heart. I see you, my daughter, 16 and already owning your story. And I couldn't be more proud. For you, only natural diamonds.
है खेलता है झूलता उछलता है दौड़ता कभी कभी दौड़ कराता है आगे आगे बढ़ता है इंडिया अमूल दूध पीता है इंडिया.
In Tamil Nadu, the battle over language returns.
ஒரே மொழி பேசுகிறோம், ஒரே எதிர்காலத்தை நோக்கி நடக்கிறோம்.
Election about identity, loyalty.
Bye bye Stalin.
Dravida model versus double engine की सरकार.
बीजेपी एनडीए की डबल इंजन सरकार बनना तय है.
The stakes are high.
From the ground, the questions that matter, the voices that shape the vote. India votes only on News 9.
Welcome back. You are watching News 9. This is Morning Brief at 9. Well, U.S. First Lady Melania Trump has firmly denied any association with disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. In a statement, she called the allegations defaming and categorically rejected claims of any relationship with Epstein. Melania Trump also denied any ties with his associate Ghislaine Maxwell, saying she had only limited and casual correspondence with her in the past. Listen in.
The lies linking me with the disgraceful Jeffrey Epstein need to end today. I never been friends with Epstein. Donald and I were invited to the same parties as Epstein from time to time, since overlapping in social circles is common in New York City and Palm Beach. To be clear, I never had a relationship with Epstein or his accomplice, Maxwell. My email reply to Maxwell cannot be categorized as anything more than casual correspondence. My polite reply to her email doesn't amount to anything more than a trivial note. I call on Congress to provide the women who have been victimized by Epstein with a public hearing specifically centered around the survivors. Give these victims their opportunity to testify under oath in front of Congress with the power of sworn testimony. Each and every woman should have her day to tell her story in public if she wishes, and then her testimony should be permanently entered into the congressional record.
Inflation in the United States has picked up as expected in February and is likely to rise even further in March as the Iran war continues to push up energy costs. Data shows price pressures remain elevated, with inflation staying above the Federal Reserve's target, largely driven by rising fuel prices and supply disruptions. Economists warn that the ongoing conflict could add further pressure, making it harder for inflation to cool in the near term.
U.S. inflation increased in February and likely rose further in March amid the war with Iran, a trend that is expected to keep the Federal Reserve from cutting interest rates anytime soon. The Commerce Department on Thursday said its personal consumption expenditures, or PCE price index, climbed 0.4% in February. That was in line with economists' expectations, but slightly higher than January's increase. It put the annual inflation rate at 2.8%. Core PCE, which excludes food and energy prices, rose 3% on a year-over-year basis. That was still above the 2% target set by the Federal Reserve, which sees the core number as a better indicator of future inflation. February's data was released later than usual due to delays caused by last year's government shutdown. Inflation was already elevated before the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran, largely because of President Donald Trump's import tariffs. The war has boosted global oil prices and sent the average gasoline price in the U.S. soaring above $4 per gallon for the first time in more than 3 years. Trump this week announced a 2-week ceasefire with Tehran on the condition that it reopens the Strait of Hormuz, which has also affected shipments of fertilizers and other goods. The disruptions are expected to raise food prices in the months ahead, explains Dennis Fulmer, Chief Investment Officer at Montes Financial.
Definitely, in terms of fertilizers to the farmers, even if those ships get through, if they miss the planting season, we're going to be definitely talking about less supply of food, higher prices, inflation. Everything that gets transported in this country, we're going to be talking about higher gas prices, higher input costs.
The Commerce Department on Thursday also reported that U.S. GDP for the fourth quarter increased at a downwardly revised annualized rate of 0.5%, which was below economists' expectations.
And on to Japan now. Japanese parent of Uniqlo has reported a strong jump in quarterly profits, highlighting resilience just before the West Asia crisis disrupted global markets. The company posted a nearly 30% rise in earnings driven by robust international demand and expansion across key markets. The result came at a time when global supply chains are under pressure following the escalation of tensions between U.S. and Iran.
Fast retailing saw a near 30% jump in profit during the second quarter. The Japanese firm said on Thursday it rose to $1.19 billion in the 3 months through February. That was well up from a year before and easily beat analyst expectations. The Uniqlo owner also raised its full-year forecast on strong international growth to around $4.4 billion. It's up from a previous projection of $4 billion and puts the retailer on track for a fifth consecutive year of record earnings. Fast retailing's second quarter ended just before the start of the US-Israeli airstrikes on Iran. The conflict has sent oil prices soaring and hurt supply chains. Markets now face uncertainty over the possibility of a permanent peace deal. Investors will look at how the Iran crisis may impact costs for Uniqlo. One example could be how many of the brand's products are made with polyester. A Japan-based supplier to the company said on Tuesday it would raise prices on polyester fibre by a fifth due to higher oil prices. Europe's retailers have also warned a drawn-out Middle East conflict could drive prices higher and lower consumer demand.
And from a renewed push in Washington on digital asset regulation to stricter cybercrime laws emerging in Asia, the world of cryptocurrency is seeing major policy shifts this week. The developments highlight a broader global trend where governments are stepping up efforts to bring clarity and control to the fast-evolving crypto space. Here's a roundup of the top cryptocurrency stories making headlines this week.
From Scott Bessent pressing Congress over a digital assets bill to Cambodia's cybercrime punishment, this is Crypto Weekly. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Congress must pass a bill to create federal rules for digital assets. He reiterated the push for rules that he says will ensure crypto development and investment remain anchored in the U.S. Bessent urged passage of a crypto market structure bill called the Clarity Act. It aims to create federal rules for digital assets after years of crypto industry lobbying. 6 Swiss banks have joined forces to test potential uses for a Swiss franc-pegged stablecoin in Switzerland. That's according to UBS. It's as lenders grapple with the growing stablecoin industry and the wider growth of cryptocurrencies. Jointly with the company's Swiss stablecoin AG, the Swiss banks are launching a secure digital live environment as a way to explore ways to connect blockchain applications with the Swiss franc. Cambodia's parliament passed the first law dedicated to targeting centres accused of scamming international victims out of billions of dollars. It's as pressure mounts on governments to tackle illicit businesses. The new law will eventually go to Cambodia's king for final signature. It lays out punishment of 2 to 5 years in prison and fines of up to $125,000. This week, Britain sanctioned the operators of what it described as the largest fraud complex in Cambodia and an online crypto marketplace used to trade stolen personal data. Workers are reportedly confined in guarded compounds and forced to commit online fraud.
And before we go, NASA's Artemis 2 mission is entering its most critical phase with astronauts preparing for a re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. Mission experts say the Orion capsule will return in a blazing fireball as it hurtles back at a speed of nearly 24,000 miles per hour. The high-risk maneuver will put the spacecraft's heat shield to the ultimate test as it withstands extreme temperatures caused by atmospheric friction. The crew, who became the farthest traveling humans in history during their journey around the moon, are expected to splash down off the southern California coast. Back on Earth, scientists and engineers at NASA's Mission Control in Houston are closely tracking every detail, analyzing data and crew communications in real time.
Reed, Victor, Christina, and Jeremy, the crew of Artemis 2, will come home. They will have traveled 400,000 miles. They will have seen what no living person has seen. They will have tested every system on the spacecraft and the environment it was built for. And they will have given us 10 days of data that will shape every mission that comes after. There's no question that we'll all be anxious, and but we'll be with the families. We'll be with them. We'll all be together. I have full confidence in the team. They do too. That we've been with them the whole time, and so we've done the work. It's impossible to say you don't have irrational fears left, right? But I'd tell you I don't have any rational fears about what's going to happen.
And that's all we have for you on this edition of Morning Brief at 9. Thank you so much for watching, but news continues right here on News 9, so stay tuned.
This is India's #1 news network, and you're watching News 9. English news as it should be.
Lockdown, Cool Street. When you're hot, we'll cool you down on Cool Street. On Cool Street. On Cool Street. Ooh, I'm on cool. Chill your dill. I'm on cool. Chill your dill. I'm on cool. Chill your dill.
The new Skoda Kushaq. Easy to love. Skoda.
Ahead of 2026 West Bengal Assembly election, polarization in West Bengal sharpens.
टीएमसी सरकार के जाने का काउंटडाउन शुरू हो चुका है.
There are three prime issues: citizenship, border, identity. Is it the Nirmam Sarkar versus May De Babu?
যতই করো হামলা জিতবে কিন্তু বাংলা.
Who will retain the throne in West Bengal? Can West Bengal look beyond the muddy water of violent politics?
From the ground, the questions that matter, the voices that shape the vote. India votes, only on News 9.
What you saw me on the field and off the field is like chalk and cheese. Is leadership acquired or leaders are born?
No guts, no glory, no pain, no gain.
My tendency is to go for magic, not for perfection.
I never give up. I like to win.
If you believe you can, you can.
Just me being here, it's a statement.
You define a concept called against all odds. You seem to be a Destiny's Child. When chips are down, the whole team could have looked up to you, said, Dada is still there. Every time, whether I scored 100 or a Sachin scored 100 or a Rahul scored 100 or a Sehwag scored 100, the scoreboard said India won.
There is a quality about me, which is why perhaps people feel I'm a perfectionist, because I don't get tired easily.
Let the kids know and the families know that one of the best ways to get a good education, go to a good school and a good college anywhere in the world is if you play a sport well.
How would it be possible for a person, ordinary person, for me to know?
ये acting कर रहा है या ये सच कर रहा है?
ये जो बात.
I'm not a very good actor in real life. Real life मेरे चेहरे पे दिख जाता है झूठ बोल रही है.
In Germany, the biggest newspaper was written on the first page. This is a finishing from Lothar Matthäus' career, and this was motivating me.
I was literally on my phone at home and they're like, oh, we have the results. We suggest that you remove your breasts. And I'm like, wait, what?
When I started stumbling and I started making the mistakes, that I realized that now that person who I have not forgiven 2 years back now I know what he feels like.
Very important understanding of life, that you will only get opportunities if you're good. If you're not good, don't expect opportunities.
The best example I could ever give is Abraham Lincoln, losing every election he ever had till he won the presidency.
You know, I actually have the feeling that my life hasn't started yet.